In this demo, Nate will provide a demonstration of how Cooper Airlines services bookings. Our booking system is powered by APIs that provide flight information, available inventory, and passenger information. Nate will show you how API developers at Cooper build API services, and then we'll create an API-based integration application to complete a flight booking. Finally, he will show you how to share those API services for reuse across Cooper Airlines, and then how to manage and secure APIs throughout their lifecycle.
To kick us off, I'm going to be logged in here as my development user. And to start building this composite service, I'm going to build the API specification for how I want my API to work. Now, I could do this through the TIBCO Cloud API Modeler, where I can build open APIs, async APIs. So I'll come in here where my project has already been started and look at an API specification that I've already completed. From within here, I have a declarative view of my open API where I could define the resource path. I could define the verbs that this API should be able to support. I can even configure the query parameters for a get, or it would be the inputs for other methods. And I could define the different responses that it supports, like my 200 response here. If I want to go to the code view, I can see the specification view here that I can either edit as a developer, or I can import a specification to continue working on it. I can also look at the UI of this web service that I'm creating. This is what my users are actually going to see when they want to work with it. So based off of this API specification, I'm going to go build an integration using that. I'll start by creating a new API-based integration. From within here, you could see that TIBCO has defined what API-based integration is, and they've recommended building from an open API specification, even though there are other capabilities that support it. So I'll search for my API that I've defined, and I'll import that, which will build for me a new application. From within here, you can see my get call has been created along with the web service trigger. This has already been pre-configured based on my specifications. You can see my path, my method, all of my input parameters and their types are already included within here. And those inputs come into my flow and also my responses. Remember, I only had the 200. That response has already been pre-configured for me as well. So my job here as the developer is to build the API and get data from other locations from within Cooper. What I'll do to start here is import some integrations I've already built from a lower level environment. I'm able to selectively import every app or flow that is included from within here. So I'll take the local flight service app first. This is basically an app that calls a local service to get flight data and either returns a 200 or an error for me. I've also imported my master data mapper. So any kind of flight data that comes in, we will deserialize into an object, and then we'll map it into our master model that works with all of our different systems at Cooper. Because I have these flows within this app, I can call them from my primary web service here. So I'll start by calling the local flight service, and I'll map in those query parameters from my API call to my lower level web service so that I can get the details of that flight. Next, I'll call my metadata service so I can normalize that flight data that came back to me from the flight local service. So I'll just take the output of the flight service, put it into my mapping service here, rename it to my flights metadata flow. I can use the response of this to respond to my API call. So now I have data that will be populating my API call. As a developer, I have functions that are available for me. So because there's an array here of data, I want to use the function to go through each result that came back. The other thing that I can do from within here is I can build branches and define logic for calling other systems. So I could call our local SQL Server database, and I can insert a log of data that I'd like each time this API is called. So as a developer, I can put in my T-SQL insert statement here, which includes all the properties that I'd like to insert into my flight data table, and then variables for each of the values. Those variables are configured down here where you can see each of the field names. And that will allow me as the designer to map the inputs to those variables here. So let's take that flights metadata and map it over. This will dynamically map all of the fields over into my SQL table. Now I can also do the same thing here if I want to connect to another system, say a cloud system like Salesforce. So I'll connect to my Cooper Salesforce production. I'll look through the list of all the entities defined in my instance. And I'll choose my flight bookings custom entity. And then I'll go to configure my operation. So because this is an upsert, I want to define the field that is the match criteria. So I'll choose my ID field, my booking ID field here. And then I'll go into input the data into this record. As you can see, it's dynamically pulled back all the metadata from my own entity. So again, I'll map my fields from my metadata service, and that will automatically map those over into Salesforce for me. Now I can actually use the debugger to call a service for me. The first thing I'll do is I'll turn on my on-premise services so I can connect to that local database. And let's pull in, I've already pre-populated a flight that I'd like to test in here, going from Manchester to Portland for 2 adults in early September. As I run this, my application is going to be built and it's going to be invoked with that test data. So remember, from within inside here, I'm going to call the flows within this application, the first one to the local flight service, the second one to my metadata mapper, and then it will go through the branches of this current flow here. So let's take a look. The first call shows my inputs, and it shows the response from my local flight service here. The next one is going to show that same response as an input mapped over to my master metadata, a very nice view of all the properties I care about. And it will show the HTTP response here. Again, that nice view of each of the properties. Additionally, you could see that I've inserted this into my SQL Server. I've inserted one row, and you could see that I've successfully upserted this value into Salesforce. Let's take a quick look from that ID and paste it over here to make sure everything looks good. There we go. My record has just been created. Looks like I won't need an expense approval there. So now we can go ahead and push this application. Now that it's pushed, I can define other settings of the application. If I want to set the visibility of this application to private and allow it to be discoverable in the cloud mesh, or I could set this to live if I was completed with it. I can also scale up the instances. One thing I do want to make sure of is I change the name of the service for other users who are looking to use it so that it's more descriptive about what it really is. Now that this is running, you can see my application is complete. It looks just like the API that I've modeled. Now I can also go in here as another user to be able to manage this API through our API management. So one form of consumption could be through the cloud mesh, which has embedded security policies within it. The second is I could go and use our API management system to find this API. As an API product manager, I can look through all of my different organizations within my TCI subscription. From within here, I can look at all of the services that have been published out and their status of them. So let's choose the one that we just created here with our get flights method. And then I can go on here to configure additional security policies, whether that's internal, external, or for partners.